So essentially what we're doing today is we're going to be taking a quick look at the history, current standing, and the future prospects of the Norwegian Krone as relates to the Norwegian economy. And as well as this, we're going to sort of be looking specifically at aspects of digitization, cryptocurrency adoption, and just general sort of market effects that could lead to wider crypto adoption, and sort of how Norway is kind of looking at it at this point in time. So let's dive right on into it. So Norway is forming a part of Scandinavia and is in fact the 118th most populated country in the world and has a population density of around 14 persons per kilometer squared, which for a landmass of its size and a population of its size is fairly spacious. The population is estimated at 5.3 million people, according to the UN data as of January 2021. And the Norway population is equivalent to a very small percentage of the total world population, 0.068. Total area without the surrounding islands, 323,000 kilometers squared. So Norway fact sheet, capital city is Oslo and has 1 million people, which is 20% of the total population, which is very solid. If you actually look at the map here, you can basically see the sort of different territories and I guess the main town of each of these territories. And there's a very long spread, and this is also got to be some of the most beautiful landscape in the world as well. I've been to Norway, what now, twice, I think. Granted, it was during the summer, so I think maybe I have a distorted view because I've heard that winters there can be very dark and quite difficult to get through. But yeah, especially the fjords and everything, I found it absolutely gorgeous. So official languages, Norwegian, Sami, and Kven. Ethnic groups, 81.8% Norwegian, 18.2% non-Norwegian. And then we have quite a high density of Christianity going on, and also a very high percentage of people who are not religious, which is actually higher than both Australia, New Zealand, and South Africa combined at this point in time. So quite a secular country as far as things go. So here we can see the Norwegian krone in its coins and in its notes at this point in time. So if we zoom out a little bit, the economy of Norway is in fact highly developed and also very mixed. And what's unique about the Norwegian economy is that there is actually quite a lot of state ownership that comes into play, not only in strategic areas, but also in strategic businesses. As we'll see later on, one of the biggest companies in Norway actually has a very high amount of ownership by the government, which, look, I think if I was to dive into this a little bit more, there might actually be some enormous benefit to be gained from this, because this potentially means that a lot of the profits generated actually go back into the development of the economy and the country itself. So it could actually be a very positive way of doing it, but I'm not really so sure about the finer mechanics. How much of that profit actually goes to the people and social services rather than private interests. But given what I have discovered about Norway, I think they've probably got a fairly honest way, egalitarian way of dealing with that. So yeah, perhaps that's a discussion for another time. Although sensitive to global business cycles, the economy of Norway has shown robust growth since the start of the industrial era. And the country has a very high standard of living compared with other European countries, and a strongly integrated welfare system. Norway's modern manufacturing and welfare system rely on financial reserve produced by exploitation of natural resources, particularly North Sea oil. So what actually isn't stated here is I think Norway is in fact the highest standard of living in the entire world. But it also is one of the most expensive places to live in the entire world as well, as we'll soon see here. So highly developed and mixed economy with state ownership in strategic areas and businesses, a prosperous capitalist welfare state. So public healthcare costs around 2,000 krone annually for 16-year-olds and over, and is free for everyone beneath. Parents have 46 weeks paid parental leave, which is really, really awesome for new families. Average net salary is $47,000. The unemployment rate is 5.2, which is also one of the lowest in the world. 30% of the labor force employed by the government, highest in the OECD, and 90% of all firms in Norway employ less than 50 people. So there is quite a strong distribution here of the workforce as well. And Norway has since declined to join the EU. However, it does participate through the European Economic Area, the EAA agreement as well. So there is still free trade and lots of business being done between the Scandinavian countries, Norway, and the rest of Europe and the world as well. So Norway's export economy here, this is a pretty crude, almost cubist or brutalist kind of diagram here, but I think it really does visually display everything quite nicely. And we can see here that the crude oil, petroleum gases are taking an enormous portion of Norway's export economy. So the exports totaled 108 billion in 2019. And as seen here, main export goods, petroleum products, machinery, equipment, metals, chemical, ships, and fish. So I'm sure we've all probably had some of that Norwegian salmon, but I think there is actually a lot of fish farming. A little sidetrack there, but again, a discussion for another time. United Kingdom is the main export partner, 21.1%, and then Germany, Netherlands, Sweden, France, Belgium, Denmark, and United States. So sustainability facts. So Norway was in fact the first country to ban cutting of trees, aka deforestation, to prevent rainforests from vanishing. The hydroelectric plants generate roughly 98 to 99% of Norway's electric power, first place worldwide. Now that is enormous. They do have a lot more access to waterfalls and to moving water there as well, so it kind of makes sense that they've capitalized on that. But still, that is an enormous amount of renewable energy generation. The Norwegian pension fund surpasses $1 trillion US. It's 190,000 US dollars per person, and it's the largest sovereign wealth fund in the world. So this is very interesting to note because right now as well, what's happening in the EU, in fact, is that I think a lot of the pension funds that are supposed to be there for the upcoming retirees essentially don't exist. And so I'm not entirely sure where a lot of this money is going to be coming from, but I think this is definitely going to give rise to some financial problems of first world countries pretty soon. It remains to be seen how this gets dealt with, but very interesting. I found when I was doing the research for this to see that the Norwegian pension fund is actually in such a stable state because it's definitely very rare in the world at the moment. It was established in 1995 and investment choices are directed by ethical guidelines, which is very cool as well. So the Oslo Stock Exchange offers Norway's only regulated markets for securities trading today. The stock exchange offers a full product range, including equities, derivatives, and fixed income instruments. The indices, the OBX and EAX, located in Oslo, as mentioned, and has a market cap of 4.644 billion as of 2018. Founded originally in 1819, and this is actually making it one of the oldest exchanges as well. Number of listings, 288 as of May 2018. So Norway's national government debt has reached 183 billion US dollars in December 2020, compared with 163 billion US dollars in the previous year. So again, I'm not sure if we can actually judge too much, just given what has happened globally with the pandemic and everything like that. I think almost every single country at this point in time is printing money to try and ease some of the hardship encountered due to the pandemic and the decrease in economic activity. So it remains to be seen how this trajectory actually continues over the next few years, but it's interesting here in 2014 to 2015, they were really managing to get their government debt right down, and unfortunately has started to creep back up ever since. So generally speaking, salaries are higher in Norway relative to other countries, and this is particularly true at the lower end of the pay scale, even though there is no national minimum wage. So this is very cool because I like it when businesses are actually given the opportunity to do what is right by their workers. And I think given that sort of freedom, business owners behave responsibly. In places where there is a minimum wage imposed, it almost, in a sort of de facto way, sets a benchmark at which employers are going to constantly sort of refer to, rather than employing people based on their skill or based on the success of the business. They kind of have this excuse to pivot to a lower wage. And so essentially this means that the more money you have in the pocket to pay higher prices leaves things a little bit more balanced. But it also explains why the service-heavy industries in Norway are so expensive. Think restaurants, bars, anything involving significant human cost, because the wages of these human workers very high, and therefore we've got things like beer, which I've heard can actually cost up to like $12 for one beer. If I think back to my time in Norway, I do remember we went for a shop to sort of get some food for a picnic, and we were quite shocked at the cost. We definitely were. And I mean, this is only relative to us having come from Australia as well. And the Australian dollar at the time wasn't very strong. And so getting into Norway was definitely a bit of a shock, but obviously this does just balance out because, as mentioned, if you've got a job, you're getting paid a good wage, and therefore that sort of offsets your cost of living. So perception of cryptocurrency in Norway is the most optimistic citizens of all European countries. 73% of Norwegians think that crypto will still exist in 10 years. That is really, really great. 11% of Norwegians would buy cryptocurrency if there was an easier way to do it. So I'm sure what we're going to now see happening with wider crypto adoption is sort of the hiding of a lot of the complexities of the blockchain platforms and cryptocurrency platforms. And it's going to really allow this very simple sort of layer 3 interface to sit on top and to hide the complexity so that it's much easier for people to use, to navigate, and to adopt these platforms as well. Because this is probably the main feedback that I hear from people who I'm introducing to cryptocurrencies, is that it's all a little bit abstract. It doesn't really make a whole lot of sense. And I think there is a huge onus on the sort of design community to really step things forward and to make interfaces that are just much easier to get your head around. But this will happen with time. I think it's just the natural tendency that takes place as things innovate. So highest level of adoption amongst young people under 40. So 8% of 18 to 39-year-olds own cryptocurrencies at this point in time. And around 60,000 people in Norway are trading cryptocurrencies. So that's actually, I mean, it's not crazy high, but it's decent, and it definitely speaks towards exponential adoption. So regulation of cryptocurrencies in Norway. So Norway's central bank has not recognized cryptocurrency as legal tender. In fact, I think the only country in the world that has done this at this point in time is El Salvador with Bitcoin. Whether it needs to be recognized as legal tender or not, you know, that's another discussion, because ultimately, if I accept something as valuable and a person that I'm trading with does as well, we're going to be able to facilitate transactions with things we both believe in. So whether or not the government's there to say that this is legal tender, that's one thing. But obviously that is a factor. If you're paying taxes at this point in time, you cannot be paying taxes with Bitcoin or cryptocurrency in Norway. So the Finance Department issued the regulation on money laundering effective October 15, 2018. And it requires platforms and exchanges to register with Norway's Financial Supervisory Authority, the FSA, and implement anti-money laundering procedures. So essentially, this is just KYC, which is sort of know your customer. I think they're going to be asking for identification. They're going to be asking for address. They're going to be asking for contact information, which to a certain extent does go against some of the principles that certain crypto enthusiasts are constantly championing. However, I think it's going to be a necessary step for there to be wider adoption. Sale of cryptocurrency is not subject to value-added tax, VAT, but it is subject to capital property income tax and other tax procedures. So actually, before we just move on there, I will actually mention as well that the tax in Norway at this point in time is also quite high. I think it can even go up to 50% tax, depending on how much you're actually earning if you're in the higher bracket, which is pretty insane to actually be paying half of what you earn to the government. But I think given the standard of living being one of the highest in the world, this is potentially how it's happened, because they really are sort of more evenly distributing some of the wealth. So the NOKU stable token, which is going to be issued by units, has a total supply of 100 million. It's going to be known as the NOKU token, that's the ticker. And it's a decentralized stable token, which is backed by digital assets instead of fiat. So what this really is going to allow for is over-collateralization of the underlying digital assets as they appreciate in value. So as an example here, let's say I buy 50,000 NOKU tokens using Bitcoin, and Bitcoin is at 50,000, not AUD, but NOKU. So therefore, the NOKU token is one-for-one backed. Essentially, what then happens is if Bitcoin starts to go up in value, I don't actually capitalize on the upside of Bitcoin's increase in price. Instead, the NOKU token just becomes over-collateralized and ultimately very sturdy. And so we're not going to get too deep into the specifics of this now. This is going to be a discussion for another time where we can really start to look at some of the nuances with how this is going to work and what this really means. But essentially, this is going to be a way for people within Norway to transact with one another. It can also be a way for them to actually trade in and out of certain tokens. And really, it's going to come down to the ecosystem itself to see how they want to utilize the stable token, what's going to happen in the future as well. So it's really there. And hopefully we can do away with some of the opaque accounting, which is currently plaguing the current stablecoin industry at the moment, with things like USDT, et cetera, et cetera. So yeah, thank you very much for watching, everyone. And if you have any questions, please feel free to fire away.